Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Divided Films, the podcast where we talk about movies that audiences and critics do not agree on. With me, as always, is my co host Keith.
Hello.
He said for the last time, maybe. I don't know.
Uh, uh.
We've been doing this for a few years now, Keith, and we have maybe some other ideas we want to explore in the future. So we to the viewers out there, this is going to be a two-part finale to the Divided Films saga, as it were. But it's been a lot of fun doing this with you, Keith, and with all the people who've joined us over all the different episodes, our recurring guests, and actually at the end of this two-parter, I will reveal I took a tally of all the times we sided with audiences and all the times we sided with critics, and so I will say that for the end to see who ultimately we side with more often. So unless people were, you could have easily counted that on your own accord, but I doubt anyone did. So, little piece of suspense for you there to keep you hanging.
It's been a fun ride.
If you had to guess, I'm curious, Keith, if you had to guess, just give me who do you think we side with more often, and by what ratio would you think?
Okay. Being the one who edits the episode, I didn't do a recent tally, but I could probably bet that we sided with the critics. And you don't have to spoil it or reveal anything. Your face says nothing right now. But I think we probably sided with the critics because I do remember going oh yeah, maybe we got 3 critics in a row. But I think it's close. I do think it's closer than it's not a wide margin, I'll tell you that. But I'll be with the audience on this, and I'm kind of curious, actually.
I have all the information. It's all mine to know and you to find out. So we'll reveal that later. But for this two-parter, we were thinking how we're going to wrap this up. And, I was going through all the movies I've compiled over the years that we might discuss eventually. And it occurred to both of us that there are actually categories of movies that tend to be divided. So we thought it'd be good to talk about divided trends. And, some of these are types of movies we've discussed before, but now let's dig in to see why exactly these kinds of movies tend to be divided. So, we'll start with the first category just to give you an idea. And that is the category of film adaptations of stage musicals. So, in the past, we talked about Rent. That was one that was divided. But, there's a bunch of other ones that are divided. And so the ones we're going to talk about for today are The Phantom of the Opera and Into the Woods. So we'll start with The Phantom of the Opera. This is a movie that is rotten with the critics, fresh with the audiences, a 33% with critics, 84% with audiences, 51% difference there. And the critics' consensus, the music of the night has hit something of a sour note. Critics are calling the screen adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's popular musical histrionic, boring, and lacking in both romance and danger. Still, some have praised the film for its sheer spectacle. Quite a long consensus there, but there it is. Spectacle, and not much else going on. So, Keith, you texted me after you watched it that it was a bit torturous for you to watch this Phantom of the Opera movie. But, tell me why. Why was it so hard for you?
This movie was fucking torture. I would not wish this movie on my worst enemy. I don't know. It's not and this isn't an indictment on the play itself, because I have seen the play, and it is I think what the movie, my only positive thing is if you like certain songs, I think they did Masquerade really well. But to Joel Schumacher's R.I.P. I do love him as a director, but he is not cut out for musicals. And I guess not every director is, but it's just the scene, it just dragged. It just dragged. They're they're hanging out in the beginning in that opening stage 20 minutes, and I know there's songs and stuff, but it's just, oh my God.
Well, that's kind of how it is in the stage version. Is that they're basically establishing the setting, and you're getting into this world of this 1870 opera house in Paris. And basically, I mean, my thing with this movie is that it is a very literal
Yes.
interpretation of the stage version. It doesn't really deviate at all or add much at all. To me, it seems more just like a way to make fandom more accessible so people can own it at home and watch it whenever they want. They don't have to go to Broadway anytime they want to watch Phantom of the Opera. In fact, I think Andrew Lloyd Webber described this movie as a record of the stage version. Just something so you can have it at home. And so in that aspect, if that was the goal, I do find that a bit uninspired. They do kind of add a few things here and there. There's like a little more backstory to the Phantom. There's that ending sequence with the grave of Christine and the flower. They do add a little bit, but really not enough to justify making this into a musical artistically. It obviously, there's financial reasons to do so. It's a huge hit and everyone is aware of the Phantom of the Opera, so of course it made a lot of money and would probably be, it probably did well for like DVD sales. But in terms of, are there any surprises in this movie? Is there anything that would have a different take on Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera? No, it's exactly what you expect. And if you want that, fine. And I think this is getting a positive score because I think a lot of audiences do just want that. They do just want what the stage version does that they can watch on their home screen, basically.
I think this kind of falls because my mind went to fascinating places when watching this because I'm just like, I was literally screaming internally. I will say, Emmy Rossum and pre 300 Gerard Butler, I thought they did fantastic jobs. It was delightful to see a very young Patrick Wilson. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my God. But I think this movie suffers from this movie suffers from what I thought Rent suffered from. And also, like, I watched Dear Evan Hansen on HBO a couple of weeks ago, and I think it suffered from that too. It's just, I'm not asking every director to be John Chu with like In the Heights, and I'm sure he's going to do a fantastic job with Wicked. And I now think, because of this movie, splitting Wicked into two parts is probably the best thing, because this was 2.5 hours of dull. It's just not visually. The songs that are supposed to be visually stunning and a spectacle, like Masquerade, and I don't know. I'm trying to. I can't really remember the name of the songs right now, but
Well, like Masquerade, for example, it's not much different than what it is on stage. It's people at a ball, and it's all in one place, and it's like it looks like about the same amount of people you would see in the stage version. They didn't really up the scale for a song like that, and they didn't really take you to any other kinds of places. It's like, just a more realized location than you would normally see in the stage version, where you have to use more of your imagination. It's just, it's a shame because there are probably a lot of people who would bring a more interesting take and flesh out this world a little more interestingly. But instead we kind of just get the same. And I think that it's serviceable, and that's not really the best thing you could say about a movie, but if it seemed like they accomplished their goal of what they wanted to do. And I think there are people who really do love watching this, just because they are swept away by the romance and everything. I mean, the romantic scenes are done in a very cliched way as well, like in terms of how they're shot, and the cadence of it all seems very familiar.
you're being very nice, because I would say the next movie that you picked was serviceable. And I'm not really that hardcore into the woods. I'm not like other theater people in my life are so into it, and I'm just like, it's good. But this movie was just it. It just I can't imagine this 84% rewatching this movie, unless like if you love Phantom of the Opera, like there are better. You could listen to the Broadway version of it, but this just brings out everything the worst that Broadway to Hollywood has to offer, and that is really bad. That is like, I know I'm being mean, and I'm not trying to be mean, but this like,
Well, it's safe. It's very, very safe.
and because it was safe, it just ended up being awful. Like I can't, I have to even, I would probably give this a lower score than the critics, and just how I felt, just what it was trying to convey, the saving grace is the performances for me.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the music though? Because I feel like this is one of those cases where if you love the musical, you're more likely to like the movie. And if maybe I mean, there's certainly Phantom and Andrew Lloyd Webber in general with his work has detractors. I think there are people who really dislike Phantom of the Opera as well, and so they probably poo-poo on this. But then you have people in the middle, and this is where I'm thinking that this category of films, the stage musical adaptation into film, is kind of a dicey thing to do, and why it's so divided, because you kind of have this middle ground of audiences who aren't the biggest musical theater fans, but they're not really haters either. So it's like hard to make it something universal for everybody.
It's been a while since I've like jumped into the Fan of the Opera world. Or since I like saw it in an actual theater. So, but when those songs that I knew or kind of remembered came back, I was involved. Like I was. It's really not the song portion of this movie that I'm harping on. Because luckily, I think Joel Schumacher not doing anything really creative. Like a lot of the songs they're just singing towards each other. They're expressing their love. They're expressing their emotions. All you need to do is simple shots. It's just like
Well, I'll say this too.
yeah.
I think that you mentioned the performances as a saving grace. I agree, because the advantage that the film would have over the stage musical is to be maybe more intimate and to maybe show more emotion in the characters, because the stage version is very much acted like it is an opera, because it's like considered an operetta, I
Yeah.
suppose. But you don't really have like much of a range of emotions from the characters as they're singing or singing acting. It's very much like everything's at a 10. In moments of heartbreak, sadness, of triumph, whatever your emotion is, you're singing it kind of in the same way in the stage version, because that's the style. But then in this movie, I think the actors do bring maybe a little more emotional nuance, at least the kind you need in a movie, because you can see them much closer than you would if you're watching it on stage. So I think the actors do try to bring that into it, and that is an improvement. But that's probably the only thing about that's the only thing about this being a film version that they take advantage of.
It's
right?
hard
Because everything.
I'll admit, like doing a musical is like, I said to myself, I have newfound respect to the director of High School Musical. Like, to do a musical is like, it's not easy. It's very hard. Like, and even the good ones, like I think even Spielberg said, like, I don't want to do another musical again. Like, it was challenging, and I'm like, he's in his 70s. I remember watching Dear Evan Hansen, and I was going like, okay, this isn't like the best, but it's not like a 30 something that it got on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm like, the critics really didn't like this. And I'm saying to myself, like, it's just kind of bland. It's milk toast. But what could you do? These kids are in school. Like, I'm not asking, like, the director probably doesn't know or doesn't want to do creative shots and all that. Like, you kind of need to tell a simple story around these simple characters. And I guess, I remember, when you're watching a play, you're so focused on the play. But with the movie, you're really experiencing it differently, and I think you're more heightened when you're watching a play, and you're not really getting bored by it.
Well, in a play, there's a lot more that the audience can project from their own imagination.
Yeah,
because obviously you can't see an entire space on a stage, and you can fill in the blanks yourself.
Very true.
In a film that has to be filled in for you. And I think also the fact that with Phantom, it's a period piece, and so they really go all out on the costumes and the makeup. It's very over the top, and I think it's also easy for audiences to get swept away in that sort of setting. 1870s France. It's it is something people like to
Yeah.
see from time to time. I give credit to like the production and everything, because it is done. Again, it's always at a 10. Nothing was held back. They really tried to give this very bombastic and overly extravagant production, because that is the feel of what the stage version is. But it's just, everything was in place to do something interesting, but unfortunately, that's not what happened.
Funny enough, I thought like the director who I don't think Joel Schumacher was the right choice for this. I think I could see why, and I remember reading that Andrew Lloyd Webber liked his use of music in Lost Boys, and I said to myself, I'm like, okay, Lost Boys is I enjoy that movie. I don't think that's a good enough reason to like. I think use of music and knowing how to shoot a musical are very different things. I think maybe the director of Chicago, Rob Marshall, like he turned that play could have been a very boring movie, but
Right.
what they offer, the different spin on it. I remember watching it for the first time during the pandemic, going like, "Oh wow, this is." I'm engaged as if I'm actually seeing a play, and it just you're right. This movie didn't have anything to offer.
Chicago is doing a different kind of adaptation of a film musical, right? With the intercutting of dance sequences with actual scenes. That was not something you really saw as much in film musical adaptations. And then you mentioned Spielberg. I mean, I was really surprised how much I loved his West Side Story, because I am a fan of the original film version, but it just, you have to be putting in so much thought into every sequence. It really can be not just physically exhausting, but mentally exhausting. You just had to keep coming up with so many different ideas to keep people engaged, because you can easily maybe peak in the beginning and then not really have much for the rest. You have to keep everything as equally engaging. So it is a challenge. But for this, I feel like I'm a little lenient on this Phantom of the Opera movie. I don't know why. Because I know maybe a lot of people who like it, family, some friends, but
I sound like a bad guy, but I will still stand by this
No,
position.
you're not.
I will stand by my position on this. Like
I in spirit, I definitely agree with your complaints, and it definitely drags. And that's something I would go out of my way to watch, but I can see how it has an audience. So, I mean, I would probably give this I don't know, a 50 kind of middle of the road score. It has something for the people it's aiming towards, but it's too bad it couldn't broaden that for a wider audience.
See, I found like Twilight more entertaining than this. Like it's like
Wow.
and I think I gave Twilight like 2 scores, but even like the actual score of Twilight, I just found it to be more entertaining, engaging than this. And I'm happy like all the stars from it have gone on to like Amy Rossum went on to Shameless. Gerard Butler is now the king of B movies.
Oh yeah, what's funny about that too with Emmy Rossum? I find that so funny. She's in this very extravagant period piece, and then she goes on to Shameless, which is like the opposite, and with like this more modern. The opening sequence of that show is her like on the toilet. It's just like it's like the opposite in terms of like the scale and epicness, and then she goes like to something.
She can sing that though. I've
feel.
heard she can hit those operatic high notes. I wasn't sure about Minnie Driver, even though I always enjoy seeing Minnie Driver. I was curious if that was her voice, but with Emmy Rossum, I know she was like perfectly cast as Christine.
I mean, I think the problem with Phantom in general is that, the characters aren't really that fleshed out to begin with. It seems, to me, when I've seen the musical and this movie, Christine, you could easily make her fall in love with you. You just have to sing one song to her, and now she's in love with you.
I'll say this, like, I love, like, a good musical movie, but I do think this probably has to rank in my bottom. And for critiques I have against Rent, and even the ones I have for the one going in the movie we're about to do next, I just think this is the worst of them. One of the worst of them.
Well, if you look at your catalog of movie musicals, specifically the ones adapted from stage, there are so many ones that are better than this, right? So if you had to grade it on a curve, my score would probably be lower. Um, but it's interesting. So we can now transition into our other pick for this category, which is Into the Woods. And if the Phantom of the Opera was too literal of an adaptation, my beef with Into the Woods is that it strays away too much from the source material, especially at the end. And in principle, that's not a problem, but basically the reason why that happens is my issue. It basically is a watered down version, and we'll get into that. But Into the Woods, that movie kind of has a flipped divide where it's fresh with critics and rotten with audiences, which I did not expect. So 71% of critics approved, 49% of audiences approved, and the consensus for Into the Woods. On the whole, this Disney adaptation of the Sondheim classic sits comfortably at the corner of Hollywood and Broadway, even if it darkens to its detriment in the final act. Now, I don't know if it means literal darken, as in dips in quality, but the stage version of Into the Woods gets very dark in the second act. And when I saw that this was being adapted by Disney, I knew that they were not going to go that dark because they want to appeal to maybe the whole family. I've got a sense that you've seen Into the Woods or you're familiar with the original stage version. I'm a big fan of it. I really enjoy Into the Woods, and I recommend anyone to watch the recording of the original cast, which is on YouTube, because then you really get a sense of why
with Bernadette Peters, the lovely Bernadette Peters.
With Bernadette Peters as she is the best. But you watch that, and to me, it is like just such a well thought out and well executed concept that it takes advantage of every avenue that the idea of clashing fairy tale stories has, and it's very smart and very relevant. It's got like universal themes. It's just I can go on and on about how much I'm a big fan of Into the Woods, and that's why I have such a beef with how bad the movie is. I mean, the second act is so butchered in the movie that it almost makes no sense, and to people who hadn't seen the stage version, they were like totally confused why things were happening. And I just think if you're not going to adapt something and keep to the themes, why adapt it at all?
I'm kind of shocked. Like Disney wanted this to be like an Oscar, like contender, and also, Meryl Streep got nominated, and I remember rolling my eyes. And
of course,
I will defend Meryl Streep giving some of the best performances of like film history. But this was like her 19th nomination or 20th nomination. She wasn't bad, but it was just like, I think this movie focused on the fairy tale aspect rather than the humanizing them aspect.
I expected more from Meryl Streep in this role, honestly. I thought I thought it was a good casting, but just knowing how talented she is and how captivating the role of the witch is. I mean, that character is at the heart of the show and the themes.
It all wraps up nicely with a neat little bow.
Does it though?
It ended.
It seemed messy.
It ended. I remember going like, wait a minute, what did I had to rewind a couple minutes just to make sure, like, I thought I took a nap for a second. Like it ended abruptly.
Right. And that's another problem too. They rushed the second act in addition to like taming it down, not killing off so many characters or really any characters. And they also just straight up cut out characters. Like there is a narrator character in the show, and in this version it's just the baker telling the story right after it happens, it seems. And that's James Corden. There's also an old man who is the father of the baker, who's also completely missing from this. And by the way, the narrator and the old man are typically played by the same actor in the stage version. So, that was definitely a choice they made, but I'm not sure why. They didn't think they had to have an actual narrator. I'm not really sure. It's just, the whole thing was a big disappointment to me. I was somewhat excited because I thought all the other casting was great. Love Emily Blunt. I'm glad they gave her this role. Anna Kendrick was, I think, a smart choice for Cinderella. James Corden, though, Nah, I think
Really,
he's fine. I guess I know he has his detractors.
like, I don't want to get into like a off tangent. I know he does a lot, and I know he kind of went fame kind of went got to his head a little bit, but I never like full on get the hate of James Corden. I'm like, he is like, he apologized for like being an asshole and said I let fame get to my head, and I don't know, it's just, and this is before everyone, like, this is his like first US role, but I never fully get the hate that he gets. Does he star in shitty movies? Yes. Does he
Yeah.
like like most of them? But I don't like I never had a problem with his like late night talk show. I actually do think there are great clips that I still watch. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine. But it's funny because of his many bad films, he's also in Cats.
Yeah,
another Andrew.
You showed me that fucking movie. And we had to turn it off because I'm like, this isn't even. This is a nightmare.
Yeah, and that's probably the ultimate bad movie adaptation of a musical. And not to get too much into that, I feel like it has to be said because that's it was so recent and it's such an abomination. But it's funny because he's probably the worst part of that movie, which is really saying something.
Oh God, this poor guy.
But to get back to Into the Woods, I think that visually it looked really good and everything. It's just it was predictable again, but this time for what I had feared it would be. And I think Sondheim was also involved in this. It's like that was kind of weird to me. I guess he kind of had to accept that this would not be the same as you would do on stage.
I can fully understand why theater major, like, people that love this play, like yourselves and friends that we know, would absolutely hate this movie. But I think for someone like me, who I think the first time I saw it, really saw it for the first time was in college, and I saw like a bad play version of it. So my whole sense of it is kind of warped, and I know the some of the songs and stuff, but I just think it suffered from like I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care, like, the story was too long. It's just, but it's still fine. It's still kind of fine.
In the stage version, the character, and I guess this is more of a responsibility of the actors, but in the stage version, you love the characters. There's so many of them, but they're all so great, and there's such high stakes. And actually, at the end, there is like a really satisfying end to the show, the finale. All the characters kind of come back, including all the dead ones, kind of as ghosts, and they sing basically all the themes again of the show, and it all comes really full circle. And like you said, in this version, it just kind of zooms out and it ends very much in an unsatisfying way.
I have a newfound respect for like the director who gets it right. Tick Tick Boom, like off Broadway kind of play, done and filmed so spectacularly. Like Lin-Manuel's vision was really kind of poured out on stage, but also I now think like I don't know if In the Woods could do it even at its most at the height of its popularity, but what Wicked is doing is splitting in two, and I think that's probably the best decision for a movie, for a musical of that caliber.
Yeah, because that one, it's fine. I actually just saw Wicked for the first time on stage, like a few months ago, and it's phenomenal. It's great. It's one of those things where like, oh, I understand why people love this. There's like a moment at the end of the first act in Defying Gravity. That's like the moment that this show stole the hearts.
That's going to be the end of the movie, the first movie.
Right, and that is smart, I suppose. And I'm interested to see. That one's a long time coming. We all knew they'd eventually make a Wicked film, so we'll see how.
But they got a great director too. I thought and I think this movie kind of got messed up by one of the COVID variants. But In the Heights, I never really. I've heard of it, but I didn't really know anything about it. None of the music.
Same. I knew very little.
Blew my mind. blew my mind. I had such a fun time with it, and yeah, no, I like.
Well, it
It
seems
just has. I found a newfound respect for the director that gets it right.
yeah, exactly. It seems like in Tick Tick Boom or in the Heights, there really is this sense of you really get a sense that things are filmed dynamically, and there's like a vision for each song, right? Like they
Yes.
really take each song like it's its own episode of this musical, and it has its own identity, and you have to be up for the task when you adapt a musical into film. You know, it's funny too. I'm thinking now also how there's the opposite way where a film gets adapted into a stage version, and I rarely find those to be good. Like I saw the Mean Girls musical, and was very underwhelmed by that. I saw, you know, it was a weird one, the Sunset Boulevard musical, which was done by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and that was kind of like a weird one to do. It was, you know, Glenn Close was great in that, but you know, whether you're going one way or the other, these are two different mediums for a reason. And
Yeah.
some stories are better told one way or the other, and it's very rare that you are able to find a story that translates well both ways. Maybe The Lion King is the best example of a movie that was adapted into a musical well.
Yeah, no, like I'm trying to. Wasn't there like a Rocky musical too, or a Rocky?
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty Woman. I remember ads for that.
I think some people like the Beetlejuice musical. That was supposed to be a good one, but again, it's like hit and miss. There's a Shrek musical. Like why?
I think it depends on the actor, because I know like the Aladdin musical. Like it's kind of being sold on that actor who plays the genie. I don't know if he's the genie anymore, but he was like I remember seeing him in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I can't remember his name right now.
Titus?
But he was kind of no, not Titus was Sebastian, I believe.
Yes.
In
That's
the Little Mermaid musical, but I think you're kind of it was Titus's like rival in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. He like he was the draw because of his charisma on stage. But I'm like, I don't. If I want to, I remember seeing Young Frankenstein the musical, and it was fun, but I can't remember any songs or anything about it. Spamalot actually kind of succeeded. Spamalot succeeded.
Well, that had a great cast.
I think they probably.
I mean, you know,
had a great cast.
Tim Curry, David Hyde Pierce. You know, I mean, like, yeah, Hank Azaria. That's an amazing cast.
I saw it at the height, and that's like it engages the fans. But yeah, no, it's amazing. I think we've been alive long enough to see when they get it. We know when they get it right. We know when they get it wrong, and we know when it's kind of,
Well,
and I
think,
feel like for me, Into the Woods is like,
I think the key to now that I think about when it's a successful translation or an unsuccessful one, is understanding that you're not just making the same thing again, but on a different platform. You're really taking the essence of that, but you really have to make it its own thing. Right, it has to have its own identity, like apart from the source material. And so, like when you make a movie of a musical, literally, or if you do the other way around, and you kind of feel like you're too stuck to that original material, it bogs the rest of it down, and the results speak for themselves. So, I mean, for Into the Woods, I would probably give that one like a 30%.
Really?
I'd like probably a bit biased because I'm such a fan of the stage musical, but yeah, that's where I would land on that one.
See, I give it a solid 52%, but that doesn't like. To go back to our very first episode, it's like a good 52. It's like I'm not like trying to be mean. It just doesn't like I really don't have a desire. I remember watching it the first time when it came out, going like I don't really have a desire to watch this again unless I have a podcast dedicated to movies where I'll have to watch it again. But I really can't see myself like gung-ho to watch this again.
I'm telling you, man, watch the film version of the original stage production with the original
You showed
cast.
it to me.
I did. Well,
you showed it. Yeah,
that's everyone.
That's
everyone
how
else.
I know. Like, yeah, no, it's a great. It's like that's if you really want to understand Into the Woods, like that. Bernadette Peters knocks it out of the park. Like it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Or you know what too, like Hamilton. They just recorded the stage version. So like there's no reason really like for a fan who are into the woods to say, well, like just make into a movie so people can access it from home.
Yeah.
Like just record the stage version and put that on a streaming service. That you might as well do that.
Hamilton would also make a terrible movie,
It
like
wouldn't work.
film wise.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
the timelines go so fast that it's a different kind. And I'm not. It's a great musical, but I'm just saying, like as a movie, it's ADD. It would be ADD.
it might
Like,
not make any sense, but I mean, I don't want to ever say you can never do something, but it would be a challenge.
Prove me wrong.
Someone out there. I mean, it's bound to
But I'm
happen.
right.
It's bound to happen eventually because these studios want to make money and people would pay, but it would definitely be harder than the average adaptation. Okay, so we've talked about one kind of adaptation, the film musical adaptation. So now we're going to go into a different kind of adaptation that typically is divided between critics and audiences, and that is the video game adaptation into film. And again, we talked about one example, Sonic the Hedgehog. That was like one episode we did previously, but there's lots of movies that fall into this category. And so the two that we're going to talk about for this episode, Warcraft and Mortal Kombat. Now, the reason why I kind of chose Warcraft for this is because I read that at the time, I don't know if this still holds, it was the highest grossing video game adaptation that was made. I don't know if anything would have surpassed that in the 6 years since that movie was released, but I find that to be surprising because no one really talks about this movie anymore. It kind of just came and went, even though it was left open for a sequel. But let me get into the stats real quick before I get carried away, which I tend to do. Warcraft has a rotten score with critics, 29%, a fresh score with audiences, 76%, and the critics' consensus. Warcraft has visual thrills to spare, but they, and director Jones's distinctive gifts, are wasted on a sluggish and derivative adaptation of a best-selling game with little evident cinematic value. So, kind of what we were saying about the musical adaptations. Like what's the justification for making this into a film besides for making money, really? And I'm not sure. Watching this, it kind of felt like watching the cutscenes from a video game.
Yeah, I think a little fun fact to add to your box office thing. I don't think this movie did that well here, but they loved it over in China enough to think that it could get a sequel. But
it was
they
written.
Loved it.
It was written and
They
filmed.
loved it.
Like it ends openly for a sequel, as if this is the beginning of a franchise that has yet to come to fruition.
I'm not a Warcraft guy. I remember one of my roommates played it moderately. Like he not like oh my god, you're addicted to the stream, get off it. But it was like, okay, we're hanging out watching King of the Hill sophomore year, and he'd be playing Warcraft, and I guess Duncan Jones, who this would be his third film, he did The Great Moon, the pretty good action movie Source Code, and they're like, okay, he can direct a studio movie. Let's give it. He loves Warcraft. We want to make this movie. I guess how do you do it? Like give it to 100 different people, you'll get 100 different movie scripts. Like where do you go with it? Like do you make it like Lord of the Rings? He kind of focused on two tribes. I would say a pretty good attempt. I know why it falls flat because there is something missing, but I would say like it is engaging. And I actually started to remember the character names when when they first lay it on you. You're like, oh my god, can't someone be called Henry in this?
Yeah. I had a hard time remembering the names and getting involved initially. It just because like they throw you right into it. I mean, like this,
they really do.
The sequence before the opening title, it's as if there was this. It almost felt like watching a sequel to a movie that doesn't exist yet, because I felt like I was missing something, and I was thinking, is this really made with the idea that you should know at least something about the video game going into this, something about the lore and the world of Warcraft? I mean, I know that it's one of those open-ended games. There's not like one particular storyline, but it just seemed like there was a lore here that I was almost unprepared to get into because they don't establish anything. You're just right into it from the
Yeah.
get-go.
It hit me towards the end what this movie I think was missing, and I'm kind of, I don't know if people can agree with me, they can yell at me, but I think this movie came out in 2016, 2017, and I think this movie would have done well when Warcraft was like really popular, like Whiterun, that South Park episode came out, which was
I was
like
gonna say
2009.
it seemed a little late.
It seemed a little late, but if they wanted to do one in 2016, 2017, it kind of had to be postmodern in the sense of like Jumanji, or like maybe the plot could have been kids playing World of Warcraft instead of like thrown into it.
Make it like Free Guy, right? Where
exactly, it had to be something like that.
Realize they're in a video game.
I just saw a trailer for that new Dungeons and Dragons movie, and I'm like, I could see this doing well. I could see this being a fun action adventure type movie, and I bet that this is just like, I could be proven wrong. I bet it's kids playing World of Warcraft. Or no, I bet it's kids playing Dungeons and Dragons. But I think this movie would have been really popular between like 2010 to 1995, just because like, oh, the lore of fantasy. But I think the fact when it was made now, it kind of had it to be, we're not looking for the same. We've seen this story before. We know how it ends. We kind of know who the bad guy is. We know it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't offer anything new. And I think if it came out, this would have been before Jumanji. It would have been like the first of that kind of movie. It would have actually had something to say about gaming or anything else.
Yeah, right. It just seemed like it was too literal again.
Yes.
Where, yeah, there was no like the story again. It's like a lot of familiar plot elements. Like there's a guy who betrays the good guys, right? There's a lot of those kind of story elements.
There's a spell that's corrupting.
You could see it all from a mile
Ben
away.
Foster, yeah.
Also, I was thinking about this is 2016. This is sort of at the height of Game of Thrones popularity, just because I would see these banners in this movie, and it was reminding me of that. And so I think like fantasy at this time was revitalized. I think the Hobbit movies had just come out, and so this is kind of like this genre is seeing a resurgence at this time, and this is like a lesser version of what else was popular at the time.
Oh yeah, they were striking while the iron is hot. It's
but there was nothing unique to stand out about it except for the fact that it's based on a video game, right? And I'm trying to think of the struggle here because it does have, like I said, a positive score from audiences, and I suspect that this might have been way more impressive to see in a movie theater. I remember seeing trailers for this in a movie theater and thinking like, wow, that looks pretty cool, I guess, like on a big screen, even though I didn't go to see it in the theaters. And I guess if you're a fan of the video game and you're seeing some of these types of like characters and some of these different like types of like races you can play, brought to this, brought to a film, brought to the big screen, I guess that could be something of a payoff.
I understand keeping it focused on two tribes, but I can imagine the struggle that Duncan Jones had to, who's David Bowie's son, by the way, if you didn't know.
Good to know.
But he, can you imagine David Bowie sitting down and going like, I'm going to watch Warcraft? It's like the pressure you have to like appeal to like, okay, I have to have all the races at one point. Raids are really popular. I have to include that, but that's not really part of my story. Or maybe I could just include, like, you kind of have to add the things that make things Warcraft while telling your own story. I'm kind of curious how fans consider this, because I don't really see people talking about Warcraft anymore. But
I mean, people don't really play the game anymore, do they?
I don't know. I think Fortnite maybe took its place. I don't know. I don't want to say I don't play video games anymore, but I don't play those kind of video games. I tried to play Warcraft, and I only lasted 12 hours, and I said I can't do this.
Well, you mentioned the South Park episode, which had to be brought up. That's probably the best adaptation that Warcraft could ever hope for. Is this could be the end of the world of Warcraft. Like that's
Yeah, they did it right. They mixed South Park's reality with the World of Warcraft reality. Like that's how they should have done the movie in a way of like they're making you can make you can have kids sitting at their computer. Yeah, like Free Guy in a way.
I mean, I can imagine too, like of all the people who've ever played Warcraft, I'm sure they've encountered maybe like their own kinds of storylines that they've engaged in, and there's all potential there because it is a
Yeah.
world that was created with a lore, and so you could come up with something. But you're right, you have to focus it in one way. I mean, maybe they should have made this a TV show because there are so many ideas and so many elements that it would be difficult to get it all down in just one story.
I agree with you like 95%, and I guess the only 5% that's holding me back is there's no way, like I actually was impressed I could care about orcs. Like I'm not, and that's a credit to their special effects department. Like, oh, I actually like I they're doing motion capture. I'm actually involved in the orcs' story. It was a shame when the orc wife died. But I don't think you can. That would be a very high budgeted TV show, maybe even in 2016.
I guess so. You're right. I mean,
But then again, we're getting Lord of the Rings now, so
yeah,
like,
right. The most
like,
expensive one ever.
like
Well,
exactly.
I guess it depends. Like Lord of the Rings, that kind of is a safer franchise to bet billions of dollars on than say Warcraft would be. Not to say, it's just
Yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, that you're right. That would be a tough one to do unless you did it like all animated. Like you wouldn't do it at the same scale. I'm not
That
sure.
could work.
But at just I want to make sure in this conversation we just tackle like what would make a good video game adaptation because I think they're far and few between, and a lot of times it is usually like the critics not liking it and the audience is liking it,
Yeah.
and so it almost to me seems like, especially when video games first started to be adapted into film, some critics were just like against the idea of that kind of adaptation to in the first place. And like I mentioned before, I don't think you should ever say you can't do anything. Like you can make a good adaptation of anything, but it just seems like this is a genre that has a harder time achieving that, at least critically.
I would say, and you probably did the same with each one of these movies. I kind of thought more about like what Hollywood and what the studio was thinking at the time, why they made it, like why is this trend successful and unsuccessful. And I guess with video game adaptations, it's funny. We reviewed Sonic on our podcast, and I think that is now the highest. It does well in animation. I'm sure the Mario movie is going to do very well. But I always think with video game adaptations, live action, there's something missing. Because I think they're like, whether it's Tomb Raider, the Uncharted movie, there's just something. You're trying to appeal to both the fans while also appealing to the wider base. And you kind of lose both of them at the same time and settle for safe mediocrity.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, Resident Evil is another one that comes to mind. I mean, that there's been so many of those movies that have been
18
made.
movies and counting. No, there's like a TV show on Netflix, I think, right now, right?
Yeah, and they have it has a cult following.
Yeah.
And again, like that was one where at least the first movie, the audiences really liked it, critics not so much. And a lot of video games, especially like the adventure ones, they have stories, right? And obviously you don't want to just take those stories and make it literally into a movie, but it seems like they would lend themselves to storytelling into a movie format. But you have to avoid the trap too of making it seem like you're just watching someone else play a video game for you, right? You don't want that either, because the big appeal, obviously, in video games is that you're in the story. I don't know if you need to capture that same element in a film version of it, but sometimes in some of these video game adaptations, they try to introduce a mechanic of the video game in the film. So like in the Doom movie, I think there's like that point of view sequence.
Oh yeah,
with, like the guy shooting. It's like, I get it, just like the game, but like I'm not the one in control here, so it's not exactly the same. But with Warcraft, it was fine. I don't think I'll really rewatch it, and it's a shame because to say a movie is fine when clearly there was a lot of production value, a lot of work was put into it, it just kind of amount to like, All right, I don't really feel strongly about it one way or the
I
other.
think, and I don't know if this is because I'm getting older. I'm sure there's a mix of that. Doing this podcast, I kind of view movies differently, but I also still like love going to the theater. I love like when a good movie hits me, it hits me. But you do have to like. There's been fine movies throughout the span of cinema. Even like when they were making monster movies back in the way back when, only like Bride of Frankenstein and Dracula still stand the test of time. There are still like fine movies. And yeah, no, it's like you know, I'm talking about like big box office budget movies that rhyme with Arvel and R Wars. Like they're fine movies. Like I mean, like some of them rise above the rank, and I recommended you one that is my Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's my favorite movie of the year, and it's why I love film. But yeah, no, there are movies that are just fine, and I kind of have to accept that. But at least like I could see Duncan Jones like really trying. Like he does love Warcraft. I could see him really trying to make this work, and I kind of had to give him credit because I wouldn't know how to make a Warcraft movie. Like I like, how do you make like, what do you do? Like you can go 1,000 different ways to tell this story. And I'm looking, I'm proposing my idea as like not only a backseat driver. I'm in the back of like the school bus going like, hey, maybe you should make a left. Like this guy is driving. So I do give credit where credit's filmed. But yeah, you're right. I don't think it's something I'm surprised this is my first time seeing it now. I kind of was like, when you recommended
Same.
it, I was like, oh, I finally get to see this movie.
There you go. You just need a reason. You just need to host a podcast to watch this kind of movie.
Yeah.
But I think that there's maybe like two sort of ways you can go initially when you make one of these kind of adaptations, and that's either like very like earnest, sincere, like genuine, or a bit more subversive, a little more self-aware. And I think that's where the next movie we're going to talk about kind of falls into, which is the recent 2021 adaptation of Mortal Kombat. So Mortal Kombat, same kind of divide, rotten with critics, positive, fresh with audiences. Not as negative, though, with critics. 54% approved, 86% of audiences approved. So it is higher with both camps. And the critics' consensus, largely for fans of the source material, but far from fatality flawed. They try to get clever there. Very funny. Mortal Kombat revives the franchise in appropriately violent fashion. There was also an audience consensus, because they've been doing that for the last couple of years. The acting is spotty and the storytelling is a bit rushed, but if you can turn your brain off for a while, Mortal Kombat delivers plenty of graphic violence and intense fight scenes for fans of the video game series. So, it seems like both consensuses are saying that good if you're a fan of the video game series. I did enjoy this movie to a degree, even though I never really played the Mortal Kombat video games, maybe like once or twice with someone who owned one. But yeah, maybe because my bar was so low that I actually did kind of like, I was pleasantly, I don't want to say surprised, but I did kind of like it a bit. And I don't know, like, what do you think? I'm like a little worried if you're gonna give me a hard time about that.
No, I kept asking myself, I'm like, maybe about like 60% into this movie, I'm like, they're not going to get to this tournament, are they? Like they're talking about this tournament, they're really hyping it up, but I'm like, they're not. I'm like looking at the time left, I'm like, they're not going to get to this tournament. I think this movie would have been better if it had better choreography, fight scenes instead of. I'm okay with like introducing characters that I know. Mortal Kombat has introduced a whole lore and characters that I may not know, but I'm okay with being introduced. But I still have to like look at like the 1995 fight with Johnny Cage and Scorpion, and go like, that's kind of like what that fight still sticks out in my mind as awesome, even though it's its own entity at this point.
That one is super campy.
No, I'm talking about that
and
specific fight scene though. That's something that that the fans wanted despite the crappiness or campiness or however they feel about the movie, it's not like one fight scene that you get him go, you get the fatality, you get the get over it, you get Johnny Cage, which this movie needed. The comic relief was not fun enough for me.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can see that. I feel like maybe because it was so ridiculous, I feel like that is where the comedy came from in this movie. Not so much like, making quips or moments of, you know, moments of self awareness. More so, it was just so ridiculous that I found myself thinking, like, this is just like a crazy ride. Let me just go along for it. And I kind of, I guess in that sense, like, I was not detached, but I knew, like, okay, I can lightly enjoy this and enjoy like the crazy fight sequences, the over the top effects, even if the story doesn't get to what it's building up towards. I did find myself kind of getting a kick out of it, basically. And again, I think that's interesting just from the fact that I don't really know much about the lore, and if someone who is like a big fan of Mortal Kombat could speak to, like, if they got it right or not, or what's appealing about the video game, if that translated into this movie, I'm not sure.
I thought that stuff with like Sub-Zero and Scorpion was like excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe it did translate well, because 84% is pretty good score for the audiences.
I guess and I never like, it's like what I think could make the movie better. I just I have to agree with you. I was like along for the ride at the end fight scene where like also my problem with like the end fight scene, I'm like, can we just focus on one fight? We're jumping too much here. Like I totally missed how Gorgon or Gorgo or the forearm dude kind of popped out of like the shed. I feel like I blinked and I missed it, the explanation. But like, okay, you get all these cool, you get the guy with the hammer, you get Cabal or and it's like, okay, they're henchmen. You got the girl with the mouth. It's just like, let's rally the troops.
Oh, Katana, is that the one with the crazy mouth?
I think so.
I just remember, like, in one of the more recent games, at least the one that I'd seen like a bunch of our friends play, that like when that character won a fight, she would get right up in the camera.
Oh yeah.
And, like, you'd see her like scary, like gross mouth, like right up on the screen there. That like stood out to me.
But I imagine they also took like it's like, okay, let's not do anything that the 1995 movie did, which is a very not a bad way to like reintroduce the franchise to the world. And I don't have a problem with them doing the it's like, what do you do? Once it's the same thing with Warcraft. It's like, okay, JJ, you have like, we're commissioning you to write the Mortal Kombat movie. What road do you take it? What characters do you do? I'm happy they like hinted at Johnny Cage, although we haven't heard anything about a sequel.
Yeah, who knows? It's tough now because like it seems like there are a lot of movies out there that have set up a window for a sequel, but yeah, we're still left hanging about it. I think maybe it could happen. I'm not sure, but yeah, it seemed like to me too they were willing to kill off characters. So I was like, oh dang, like you're introduced to some of these guys that I did recognize from the video game franchise, and they're killing them off.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, like they're not fooling around here. So it did add actually a little bit more suspense. Like, okay, I really don't know who's gonna survive this at the end.
Yeah, no, I wish there was just a little bit better, like fight choreography, like something out of like the movie The Raid or even like John Wick or something like that. I just like there's a reason why those movies stick out, and it's because of their action sequences. And I just like, I'm not asking. I don't know. They had a uphill challenge for them, and I give them credit for making something that I don't hate this movie. I just saw it like, all right, like I said to myself, I don't know Mortal Kombat like I used to.
I liked it. I think I would probably give this like, I don't know, maybe like a 70, like for what it is. Like, yeah, I think that it set up for what it wanted to do, and it was yeah, I there's a certain balance there between being ridiculous, but not too ridiculous to totally push me away. Where I think it was riding a fine line there, and it for the most part was able to do that. And it was fun. I thought it was like a fun, silly movie that like the audiences, you turn your brain off.
It's a good Friday night,
and you just
it's a good
go
Friday
along.
night watch. Like I would give it somewhere in the 60s. Like,
yeah, it stood out for me a little bit more than say like Warcraft did. But again, like these are two movies or these are two video games. I guess Mortal Kombat does have in the later games they do have more of a storyline, but I know like the original arcade game, I don't know if that had a storyline or if it was just like just two characters.
It's all centered around a tournament.
Right. But I'm not sure how much more story there was to it than that. I just know that in the 90s, like the game Mortal Kombat had a lot of press for how violent it was. It was shocking to people at the time. And so that probably propelled it. That probably made it more successful.
One point I just want to make is like I am kind of curious of the first like live action video game, because I know they do Castlevania and they're probably going to do like Legend of Zelda on Netflix or something. But HBO's doing The Last of Us, and that is a survival horror. Like considered one of the best games of the past decade. It's amazing, powerful video game storytelling. It's kind of very cinematic, I would say. And I'm kind of curious how, like, in television form, how people are going to react to that. Like how people, non-fans of the game, like I'm curious if my parents, when they watch this, will they like it, or will they go like, how will they react when I go, that's a video game, right? Like that's based on a video game. So I think maybe shifting some when it comes to live action versions, shifting into television. This Mortal Kombat would have been a good TV show too. I have no problem with that either.
I kind of got a sense of that too, because if you say maybe like the first hour of the movie could be like a pilot, because you're introduced to all these characters and you're introduced to this like new world that they're exploring. Yeah, you're right. It could have been. I think all the actors had like pretty good chemistry with each other for as like over the top as they were playing it. You're right. That would be interesting to play it that way. I think the problem with so many of the failed video game adaptations is that they try to force the format again. Like they're trying to force the story into film almost too literally. I think it's like there's a disconnect between, oh, this is a popular video game, but let's just turn it into a generic movie.
Yeah.
It seems like there's not enough understanding of the video game market because it is a huge market, and now you're seeing like the video game world has like evolved so much over the last 10 years or so, and it seems like people in more traditional media who run like those traditional storytelling, they struggle to keep up, and they sometimes don't really know how to translate that material and understand the appeal in the first place.
I think I'm not saying it's going to take the place of like superhero films. I would be shocked if it did, but I think it hasn't clicked yet for studio and storytellers on how to really make that one that stands out. But when it does, I think it's going to create people are going to look to that film and go, what did that film do that we have to get in our video game adaptation?
It's there.
It hasn't happened yet.
Right. It's like one of the last codes left to crack in Hollywood is, how are we gonna figure this out? And it
might be in the TV. It might be in the TV. Like we shall see.
Might be better suited because each of these video games have entire worlds worth exploring that you might need a longer format to do that successfully.
And you get to go to know the characters. Like you get to actually, you're not sacrificing. You're not putting the story first, which a lot of these movie adaptations do. I
think also there's some video games don't need to be adapted into film. I mean, look at the Final Fantasy series. I mean, those basically are like movies that you get to play in, right?
They tried. Well, they tried way back in the day. They made a Final Fantasy Spirits Within, considered one of the worst movies.
There's also a conceit. There's a conceit I feel like in something I was under the impression with when I was much younger, as if like a movie is the end all be all format that like whether book, TV, musical, video game, whatever, like to be adapted into a movie is like the ultimate goal for any media, and like that's not really true. Like some things don't really make sense to make into a movie, or some things are better off in their original medium. So yeah, I think that's like another thing. Like, oh well, we have to make it into a movie, right? Like, isn't that what you want? Like, no, not everyone really wants that or needs that. So I think it's a conceit that I think needs to be stepped away from.
Like, I'm so happy they never made Legend of Zelda into a movie. I know, I don't know if that's blasphemous to say, but we all know, like they made a good April Fool's trailer, but it looks good as a trailer. It would not be a good movie.
No, it's already so cinematic as it is. Breath of the Wild, like that. Yeah, I love it as that format. I don't need it as something else. Two video games I would love to see made into a film. People would Pong, right? Like let's see how that would turn into a movie. And The Sims, right? I want 90 minutes of just characters talking in the Sim language, like Badurga Hurga, Furga Furga Durga, with subtitles. Give me that. And it's like the original Sims animation.
The closest you'll get to a Sims movie is The Truman Show.
That's true. That's a good one. I like that. All right. Well, Keith, we have other we have other movie trends to discuss. And we're almost out of time. We're gonna have to move on. We're gonna have to save the rest for part 2.
Do we end on a cliffhanger?
Well, I'm hanging on the edge of this cliff here.
Let's go over the edge.
JJ,
watch out behind you!
Oh no! Stay tuned for the epic conclusion of the Divided Films franchise.